Welcome to VSAC Shows You How. I'm Marilyn Cargill, Vice President for Financial Aid Services at VSAC, and tonight's topic is how to file your FAFSA. We are starting this presentation with a series of poll questions to help tonight's presenter tailor her remarks to what is most useful for you. If you haven't already answered the question, there's time to do that right now. Tonight, we will walk through the entire FAFSA process, from entering your demographic information to signing and submitting your completed FAFSA. Filing a FAFSA, which is the absolutely most critical important part of filing for financial aid, normally takes less than an hour and frequently as little as 30 minutes. Tonight may take a little longer because we want to be sure to answer your questions. And speaking of questions, one of the best reasons to join a live webinar is so that you can ask your questions of the expert. To raise questions from the Zoom presentation, you can type your questions into the Q&A section. If you're joining us tonight from Facebook, just type your questions in the comments. We also plan to have time at the end of the presentation for any additional questions that you might have. It is my pleasure to introduce you to tonight's FAFSA expert, Carrie Harlow. Carrie is part of the Career and Education Outreach Program at VSAC and has been helping families file FAFSAs for over 20 years. She is the mother of two and has also helped each of her children file their FAFSAs for financial aid. Her youngest college-age son claims to hold the record for the fastest time filing a FAFSA and the Vermont grant application with a time to beat of 38 minutes. So Carrie, if you're all set, we're ready to get started.
Wonderful. Thanks, Marilyn. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that one of the questions our outreach counselors in career and education outreach get asked quite often by families is, should we file a FAFSA? Maybe they would say things like, we don't think we're going to qualify for federal financial aid. And so what I would recommend is I have probably 4 reasons why you should file a FAFSA, even if you think you might not qualify for financial aid. The first reason is that some colleges do require that students file a FAFSA in order to be considered for institutional financial aid. So you might want to check that out with the colleges that the student's applying to. Additionally, students can receive a federal student loan through filing the FAFSA. And right now, those interest rates for federal student loans are at 2.75% for this school year. So it's a very preferable borrowing product for students. Additionally, the College Board has a scholarship program called the College Board Opportunity Scholarships. And one of the scholarships that students can apply for is simply based on them filing a FAFSA. They don't have to fill out an application, send a transcript, or write an essay. They just register for the Opportunity Scholarships and let them know once the FAFSA is filed. Finally, if your family has special circumstances, for instance, on tonight's FAFSA that we're talking about for the 2021-2022 school year, we're using 2019 income information. A lot of people's 2020 income information is different. And so if you want to speak to your college or university about the special circumstances that you're encountering, it's best to have that FAFSA filed to begin the conversation. And so for those reasons, you might want to consider filing a FAFSA even if you think that you might not be eligible. You might be surprised. So let's get started. Today we're going to be using a test environment from the Federal Student Aid Program. We are not on a live FAFSA because of privacy concerns, but also because Federal Student Aid would not like people filing fake FAFSAs. So we are on this test environment. And a couple of times I'm going to move back and forth to be able to show you how things might look differently if you were in a live FAFSA. So you'll notice if you go to fafsa.gov, that's where you will find the FAFSA. And the first thing you're going to do is log in. You can choose to log in as the student. If you have the student sitting in front of the computer, which I did with my kids, I had them sit in front and I supported them off on their shoulder. But tonight we're going to say I'm a parent. And what I should tell you is once you sign in, whether you sign in as the parent or student, the FAFSA looks the same. So in this case, we are using Larry, last name. And you'll notice that the student social security number is masked. You can click on show social security number so you can see what that is. P.S. This is not a real person's social security number. And the student's date of birth, and then we'll log in. There's a disclaimer here because, again, Federal Student Aid is a very specific organization. The FAFSA has a very specific process. So as people log in, they're saying, yes, I'm only using this website to apply for financial aid. I'm not trying to get anyone's private financial information by doing this. You'll notice as we get here that there's two options for students to file. There's the 2021-22 school year and 2020-2021. One of the common errors on the FAFSA is choosing the wrong year. So for students who are class of 2021, we want the 2021-2022 FAFSA for when they will be in college. Oh, someone has been working with this FAFSA. All right, we're gonna have to move back.
Carrie, while you're doing that, I've got a couple of questions that have come in, and I'm going to go ahead and answer the ones that I can.
Okay.
So one of the questions is, on the poll question we asked, if you were filling out this form for more than one student, I have a 12th grader and a 10th grader. Would that be considered more than one student? And the answer is no. You're only filing your FAFSA for the student that is actually going on to college next fall. So your answer would be for one student. Another question that we got is about the FAFSA ID. The question about the FAFSA ID is a bit confusing. Do I need two IDs if I have two children in college? On that particular question, each of your students needs their own ID, but the parent only needs one ID. Is that correct, Carrie?
That's correct. So each student does need their own FSA ID, and the parent will have their own FSA ID. It belongs to the person. So the parent, they will only have one for themselves, but each child needs their own. All right. Okay. We're going to try this again. So we have Brian. One of the challenges of working in the test environment is that other people might use these FSA IDs. Give this a try. Perfect. So this says, welcome, Brian. And they are also prompting to make sure that this information is correct. One of the most common errors on the FAFSA is social security numbers. People tend to mistype something, or I have seen sometimes parents type in one child's social security number when they're filing a different child's FAFSA. So really important to check that, and this does stop you and say, take another look. We've got this disclaimer, and we're going to say, hey, we're applying for 2021-2022. And the FAFSA asks us to create a save key. And the reason why is if we have to leave the FAFSA and come back to it, then we can use that save key without having submitted the FAFSA. Also, if we happen to get dropped off because there's heavy internet traffic, this gets you right back in again. And the save key can be anything. So tonight, Brian's save key is save key.
Carrie, before you go on, we have a number of people that are asking, how do they get a FAFSA ID?
That's a great question.
For both them and for their student.
Perfect. So if you are going to the website studentaid.gov, when you are on that website, there is a place to create an account. And that's going to be the place where each person can create their FSA ID. Now, the thing about the FSA ID is that, of course, one per person. And also, you need to have either an email address or a cell phone number that you can enter to verify your information and verify that it's you. But that email address or cell phone number can only be used for one account. So you can't use the same email address for multiple accounts. And the FSA ID takes a little bit of time to set up because you are verifying information. You'll set up the account. You can sign a FAFSA right away after you create your FSA ID, but it will take a couple of days for them to verify that the Social Security number is yours and also that you're a US citizen, because that is one of the requirements for federal student aid is if you're a US citizen or permanent resident. So when we go into the FAFSA, they give you a little introduction. They like to tell you what's going to happen before it happens. And so one of the things you can see is how long will it take to complete this? And they say it depends whether or not you have all your information gathered up. So it would be good to have your information together before sitting down to file the FAFSA. And they recommend that it could take less than an hour. Additionally, there's a place where you can look at the documents needed to complete the FAFSA as well if you wanted to find that out and didn't have that information available. So we have Brian's information in here because we did enter that in. We're going to put his middle initial in there. And his email address. The other thing I should recommend is that when you're creating that FSA ID, high school students, it's really important that you not use a school email address. There are a number of high schools in Vermont that will turn off your email after you graduate from high school, and you will need to file a FAFSA for each year that you want financial aid. So if you have not already, please create a free non-high school email address that is career and scholarship appropriate. And a little secret when you're filing the FAFSA, this is unique to us here in Vermont. If you type V under state, it will always take you where you want to go on the FAFSA. And it also asks, have you lived in Vermont for at least 5 years? This is a question for the Vermont Grant Program. Are you a US citizen? And they also mention, again, this is a place where it stops you for a minute and it says, hey, just so you know, you're eligible to transfer your information into Vermont State Student Aid application. And so it asks about the student's high school completion status. So this student's a high school senior. He'll have his high school diploma when he starts college. This student will be working on his first bachelor's degree. And you'll notice that the minute I said he's working on his first bachelor's degree, it asked, will you have your first bachelor's degree before you begin school? And it automatically said no, because I said the student was working on their first bachelor's degree. This asks, what will your college grade level be when you begin college in the 2021-2022 school year? This student says never attended college first year. For students who have dual enrollment credit or who are doing early college, you will still say never attended college first year because you have not yet graduated from high school. The question about, are you interested in being considered for work study? I recommend that students always say yes. You can always say no if you're offered it and you decide you don't want it. Brian is a male student, so we say that he is male. And it mentions that most male citizens and male immigrants must register with Selective Service to receive federal student aid. Now, Brian is not yet 18. His birthday's in November. So of course he's not registered, but one of the questions they will ask if the male student is already 18 is, do you want us to register you? And you can say yes to that question and have the FAFSA register the student for Selective Service. This is a question on the FAFSA you can skip. So it asks for the student's driver's license number. Again, you can see at the top here, it says student's driver's license, and the banner here says student information. If you don't have that information, you can skip this question and move right on. This also asks if Brian was a foster youth or if he was in the foster care system at any time. This student was not. This asks about high school completed by parent one. In this case, Brian's parents have both graduated from high school. And you'll notice a message came up that said the application's been saved. What we recommend is that you save often. There's a banner, a black banner at the top, and there's a place to save. This way, if you get kicked out for some reason, you've got that information saved and you're moving along. But the application does save occasionally as you're moving through. This information about the name of the high school, when we're working in forums nights and helping families, I usually recommend typing in the least amount of the name of the school and the most recognizable name of the school. It's difficult sometimes if you have a school that starts with Saint or Mount or even BFA. If you type in something that's more recognizable like Albans, Abraham, Johnsbury, that will also help you find this high school and not have to worry about whether or not you've got the right spelling or whether it's an abbreviation or not. So I did put in the state as Vermont. When I hit confirm, I see Champlain Valley, Union High School, and UHSD. My recommendation from our Vermont grant program is there are two that look the same. And then we just move next. Now it's going to ask about colleges or universities. And this asks, do you know the college's federal school code? Well, in this case, we don't know the school codes, and most people don't. So please do not get worried when you see this. But what I can tell you is that we can search and we can find the colleges, and there is room for up to 10 colleges to receive a student's information on the FAFSA. To file a FAFSA, you need at least one. So in Brian's case, I'm going to go to state because Brian's applying to a number of Vermont schools. So we're going to just search on Vermont. And what you can see is all of the Vermont schools come up here. So we're going to choose a bunch. All right. And we've selected 7 schools, so there's room for more. And we're going to go to you can also search on city and state. So now we've got the Boston schools here. we're going to say, yeah, Boston University. And Northeastern. And I'm ready now. So we're going to hit next. We have 9 schools on this list. And then it prompts us to pick the housing.
Carrie,
Yes.
before you go on, we have a question. What happens if she's applying to more than 10?
Oh, that's a great question. And that does happen. So what you can do is you can look at the deadline dates for the colleges and when their financial aid has to be filed. Pick the earliest 10 schools and submit the FAFSA with those 10. The FAFSA will take a couple of days to process, but once it processes, you can log back into the student's FAFSA, remove some of the schools that were already sent information, and add new ones.
Okay, so a couple more real quick questions. What if your child is still deciding on colleges to apply for? Can you input one college and it's not your final choice?
You can definitely do that. You can input one college to submit the FAFSA, and then you could, for instance, add more as time goes on, or you could take that college off and put 10 more in once the student has decided where they're going.
And one last question on this. What about schools in Canada?
So for schools in Canada, there are some schools in Canada where you can, where they're eligible for federal student loans. And so some schools in Canada can be used. So I'm going to hit previous. And we will add more schools. And you'll see foreign country is an option. And so you might need to type in a city name. And oh, there's McGill. So we add them. And so you can add them to the FAFSA if they participate. Sometimes if they don't, you can send a copy of your student aid report to that institution. But as you can see, you can add some Canadian schools on here. The student's marital status, again, we're still in student information. Sometimes it's confusing when the parent's sitting in the computer. So again, still student's marital status. Brian is single. He's in high school. As the mom of a student, we would hope that that's the case. The questions, these are now questions about dependency. So does Brian now have, or will he have children who will receive more than half of his support from Brian between July 1st, 2021, June 30th, 2022? Does Brian have dependents other than a children or spouse that he's supporting? And that would also be no. And then the rest of these are also dependency questions. So is Brian currently serving active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces? Is he a veteran? At any time since he turned 13, were both of his parents deceased? Was he in foster care, or was he a dependent or ward of the court? As determined by a court in Vermont, is he or was he an emancipated minor? Does someone other than his parent or step-parent have legal guardianship of him, as determined by a court in that state of legal residence? And that's legal guardianship, not custody. I want to just clarify that. And in Brian's case, none of the above is true. So we hit next. And the next question is, on or after July 1st, 2020, was he homeless, or was he self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? And in Brian's case, that's also a no. When we do this, it says, hey, based on the answers here, Brian would be considered a dependent student. And this means he has to provide parental information. At this point, the FAFSA says, will you be providing information or not? Dependent students need parental information on FAFSA. And if a student cannot get parental information, they can say they're unable to provide information, but they're going to be limited on the type of financial aid they receive. They could only receive an unsubsidized federal loan and possibly not college aid. If there are special circumstances, like Brian's parents are incarcerated or something like that, he can say, I'm unable to provide information about my parents, and then follow up with the colleges about something called a dependency override, where the college can do a professional judgment on this and say, yes, he does not need to get parental information. So let's talk a little bit about whose information goes on the FAFSA. So Brian's parents have to be on the FAFSA. If a student's parents live together, if a student's biological or legal parents live together, it is both parents on the FAFSA, regardless of their marital status. If Brian's parents are not living together, then it would be the information of the parent that Brian lived with the most in the last year. That parent's information would be on the FAFSA. If that parent's remarried, then it is the parent and step-parent's information on the FAFSA. In cases of shared custody, so sometimes I will be at a forms workshop or meeting with a family, and they say to me, it is exactly 50-50. The student spends 50% of their time with one parent and 50% of their time with the other parent. If that is the case, then the next question on the FAFSA, as far as who's going to be on it, is which of the parents provided more financial support? And it could be things such as who's providing their health insurance, or who's providing extras for them in school, or buying clothes or things like that. So it would require some thought and some discussion, but usually you're able to figure out which parent should be on the FAFSA based on that information. Now we've moved into parental information on the form. Marilyn, are we ready to go, or do you have questions?
I have a quick question for you. Carrie, you've just talked about the fact that you would need information from both parents. And so a question just popped in. Do both parents have to have a FAFSA ID?
So only one parent needs an FSA ID.
Thank you.
So it is only one, and you can decide in your house who that person will be. And so as we move through the parent information, as of today, what's the marital status of the parents? And we're going to say married. And then they will ask, when did your parents get married or remarried? And that would be the most recent date. So if this is a remarried couple, it would be the month and year that their marriage happened, not the month and year that the birth or legal parents got married. In this case, this family got married 10 of 2001. We're moving forward.
So Carrie, another quick question on that. If someone has had 2 marriages and 2 divorces, we have a question that came in that said their marital status is divorced, no matter which marriage we're looking at. But is the date that they want there the date that the 2 parents of the child divorced, or the date of the latest divorce?
So it would be the most recent change in marital status.
Perfect.
So that would be reported there. That's wow. That I almost got stumped, but I do remember this one. And so again, that would be, the most recent. And part of the reason why they're asking this question is because they're trying to figure out tax information, because that parent might have filed a joint return, for instance. All right, so we're going to enter in parent's social security number. And it doesn't matter who goes first, you just have to keep track. If you have 2 parents, just keep track of who went first. The reason why it becomes apparent when we go to sign the FAFSA. And the reason why I say is because Susan, last name, who I'm entering here, is going to be the person who has their FSA ID.
Carrie, I've got a couple more questions on this divorce situation or separated situation.
Okay.
Um, if parents are still legally married but separated, they don't reside together, and only one parent provides all financial support for the student, how does that affect the filing of the FAFSA?
Okay. So because they're physically separated, even though they're still married, we would use the date of the separation that took place, like when they separated households. And the second part of that question was whose information to use, right?
Right.
Um, i- is it shared custody? Can you remind me?
No,
Thank you.
sorry. If the parents are still married but separated and do not reside together, and only one parent provides all financial support for the student, how does that impact filing the FAFSA?
Okay, so the first question is, who did the student live with more? So for instance, when that separation happened, even though one parent's providing all the support, which parent did the student live with? That's the first test, if you will. So if the parent who's providing all the financial support is the one the student lives with, that's definitely the student on the FAFSA. But if the student's living with a parent, but the other parent is providing financial support, it goes to the parent the student's living with.
Perfect. Thank you, Carrie.
And so this also asks of these 5 years. And when we get to household size, the FAFSA's been counting. It notices that there's been 2 parents reported and a student. And then it also asks if the parents' which other children are living there. The parents will provide more than half their support, and the children can answer no to all the dependency questions that we answered earlier. In this case, there are 2 additional children in the household. Other people, if they live with your parents, if your parents provide more than half their support, and if your parents will continue to support them, there's no one else that's in that description in this household. And then the question is number in college. So it is the number in college who will be in college between July 1, 2021 and June 30th, 2022. And so in this case, we could say that there are 2. Brian has an older brother, and there are 2. And then we're asking about tax information. So for 2019, have your parents completed their tax return? They have. So for the 2021-22 school year, we are using 2019 income tax information, which hopefully was filed this past spring. It will ask what type of tax return the parents filed. Most folks have filed a 1040, but there are other options there if that was the case. And then what is the parent's tax filing status? So in this case, it's a married filing joint return. And you're prompted to use this IRS data retrieval tool. This pulls financial information right from the IRS from the filed taxes. And so this is the preferred way to use information when you are filing a FAFSA, because there is nothing more official than income information coming from the IRS. Now, not everyone can use the IRS data retrieval. If you've recently had some sort of fraud against your tax return, that's not going to work. If your marital status recently changed, that's also maybe not going to work. For instance, if you filed married filing joint, but now you are separated. So there are some people who can't use this, but if you can, it's recommended that you do link to the IRS. And so remember, this is where the FSA ID comes in, because parent 1 has the FSA ID. And we're going to enter that information and hit next. Oh, and this could happen. because of a system error. That's okay, because here's what we're going to do. We're going to actually switch now, and I'm going to show you what it would look like if you use the IRS data retrieval. So can we look at the slide deck, please? Great. When you go ahead to use the IRS data retrieval, it gives you another one of those disclaimers, and it says that this is a government system and it's for authorized use only. You are only using this to file the FAFSA form and not to try to check out anybody else's income or to find other information or to commit any sort of fraud. Next slide, please. And so once you hit the continue button, it brings you to this get my federal income tax information, and you have to put in the person's name, so one of the people on the tax form, the address, and the address has to match exactly to what's on your 1040 form. So it's great to have that handy while you're filling this out. If you live at 15 Street and street is spelled out, you have to spell it out as you're retrieving your tax return information. If it's ST, Street ST, then you have to have the ST. It has to match exactly. Next slide, please. And when you get to the bottom, there's a place to submit. So you enter in all that information, you hit submit, and next slide, please. And it will show you all of the 2019 federal tax information that will transfer. And there's a place where it says transfer my information into this FAFSA, and you would click on the box and hit transfer now. And that information then comes into the FAFSA. Next slide, please. And what you will see is, for instance, what is that adjusted gross income? And it will say transferred from the IRS. So each question that has a tax line number referred to on it on the FAFSA will get that transferred from the IRS that comes through from using the IRS data retrieval. All right. And so I'm going to now switch back to where we were. And I'm going to hit next. Oh, we're going to skip that. But this information, what was your adjusted gross income, would say transferred from the IRS if you'd use the IRS data retrieval. If you're not able to use IRS data retrieval, then you can enter the information manually right from your tax form. You'll notice it says where the information's found, IRS form 1040, line 8B. Don't worry about that income estimator that's right there. You don't need that. You have the line number. And we're going to hit next. Now, this is often confusing for parents when we are filling out the form, because we just said what the income was, and now it's asking how much did you earn, and that's kind of confusing. But one of the things that the IRS data retrieval can't do for us is it can't separate out the wages and say who earned what. So in this case, we have to enter in the wages for each of the two parents who are involved. And then it asks about the parent's income tax for 2019. Again, this says this is the total amount of the IRS form 1040, line 14, minus Schedule 2, line 2. If you don't file a Schedule 2, then you're just using what's on line 14. And then there are more income questions. So this asks about combat pay or special combat pay that a parent received. The next one is student college grant and scholarship aid reported to the IRS in your parents' income, so not the students. Education credits that the parents might have received. And you'll notice this says from IRS line 1040, Schedule 3, line 3. If you had done the IRS data retrieval, this would say transferred from the IRS. Untaxed portions of IRA distributions and pensions. On here, it says exclude rollovers. If this information had come from the IRS data retrieval that would have set it there. If there was a number in line for A, which was an untaxable amount, they would ask, was any of this a rollover? IRA deductions are also listed. Again, if there's an IRS line from the 1040, then that would have gotten transferred. And tax exempt interest, again, it gives you the line right from the IRS. And I clicked on the little question mark. So if you're uncertain, what's really great about the FAFSA this year is they actually show a copy of the 2019 tax form, and they have like put a red box around where you would look for that on the tax form. Kind of cool. Let's go ahead and hit next. And then, did your parents have any of the following items in 2019? So child support your parents paid. So that would be paid to another family. Earnings from work under a cooperative education program offered by a college. Again, we're still talking about parent information. Highly unlikely that parents have that, but possible if the parent's in school. Taxable earnings from need-based employment programs like federal work study. And so in this student's case, these are all zeros and we don't have to update anything.
Carrie, a quick question for you.
Yes.
If someone is attempting to import their information and for whatever reason it's not coming in, should they just go ahead and enter their tax information, or would you recommend they try to figure out what is the problem that's causing it to not import?
You could certainly do that. You could try to troubleshoot it. You could also just go ahead and data enter the information. There's a number of reasons why it sometimes doesn't work. In my family, ours didn't work for the first 2 years when we were applying for financial aid. Little did I know that on our tax form, because our tax preparers program, my husband has a suffix on his last name. And our tax preparers program actually put the suffix at the end of my last name too on the tax return. I didn't realize that. And so the first 2 years, we couldn't figure out why it didn't work. And then I saw the suffix and tried it. And so for the last 2 years of us applying for financial aid, we just submitted ours for 2021, 2022 the other night. We were able to do it. So please don't lose any sleep if you're not able to make the IRS data retrieval work. But sometimes you can look at it and take another check and see if something looks a little off like that and is everything exact. But if not, you can go ahead and move on. So again, they're asking more about parents' income information. And this talks about child support received for all children in the household. And so if the parents had received that, they would report that there. Housing, food, or other living allowances paid to members of the military, clergy, or others. Payments to a tax-deferred pension and retirement savings plan. And this information comes off the W-2 boxes 12A through 12D. And there are specific codes. So you want to pay attention to those codes because not all codes get reported here. Like code C doesn't get reported here. Code double D doesn't get recorded here. So make sure you watch those codes. You might need to have a calculator close by to add up differing information and put it into this box. Additionally, veterans non-education benefits like veterans disability or a death pension gets put here. And then other untaxed income not reported, things like workers' compensation or private disability payments, that would be put into this question on the FAFSA. This is where parental assets get reported. And so as of today, what's your parents' total current balance of cash savings and checking accounts? You'd have to probably look at your different accounts and add that money together. In this case, this family has $15,000 in savings. And then as of today, what's the net worth of your parents' investments, including real estate, but not your parents' home? So one of the other common errors that happens on the FAFSA is parents accidentally reporting their home value or their retirement plans under this net worth of investments. The parents' primary home that they live in, and retirement plans do not get reported on this line. What does get reported on this line? Things like mutual funds, stocks and bonds that are owned that are not in a qualified retirement plan. A second property would get reported here, or a rental property would get reported here. Additionally, if you have a 529 plan, the value of all of the 529 plans that the parents hold gets reported here in this place. And so again, you might need to have a calculator handy to add up differing amounts. In Brian's family's case, they have a camp that's worth $50,000 and it has $10,000 worth of debt on it. So the net worth of that is $40,000. And the family also has some 529 plans for Brian and his siblings. And that equates to $30,000. So this family's reporting a total of assets of $70,000 on here. And then on the FAFSA, as of today, what's the net worth of investment farms? And they're very clear. They say don't include a family farm or a family business with 100 or fewer full-time or full-time equivalent employees. So if you have a small business with 10 employees, this does not get reported on your FAFSA. In Brian's case, this would be a 0.
Carrie, just a couple of quick questions. How many years of parental information goes on to the application?
So on the FAFSA, it's just 1 year of income information and the current value of the assets as of the time the application's being filed. But a student has to file a FAFSA each year they want to be considered for financial aid for college.
Okay, so a couple more real quick questions. Assets can change, like the amount you have in your cash savings and checking account today could be different than it would be 2 weeks from now when you pay your mortgage. Are they looking, does it have, it's the day you file your FAFSA what's in those accounts, correct? It's not an average of the month. It's not the lowest or the highest. It's whatever exists on the day you file.
Correct. So it's really a snapshot of what's happening in that moment in time.
Okay, so there might be a reason for families to be judicial about the day they file their FAFSA, but it is still whatever is in the account on that day.
That's correct. It is whatever's in the account on that day. And let me add this. We get the most questions about assets. If we're talking about income and assets on the FAFSA and what gets reported, we get the most questions about assets. And I hear things like, should I pay all my bills before I file the FAFSA? Or I have a bunch of money in an account, should I spend it and buy a new car? My response is usually things like, do you need a new car? How old is your old car? We're not financial advisors, nor do we play one on TV. But what I can tell you is that in the financial aid calculation, parental assets are protected pretty heavily. They're looked at a rate of like somewhere from 5 to 7%. So $10,000 in assets means $500 to $700 worth of family contribution. So when someone says to me, should I spend $10,000 to make our assets look lower? It's really a question of, you know, it changes your family contribution, not by very much. And some people would rather have the $10,000 in case they need it. So, so it's something to think about. I understand that assets are, you know, this is hard-earned money that people have saved, but at the same time, that is largely protected in the EFC calculation that federal student aid uses.
One last question, then I'm going to let you go on. We've had at least 3 people ask tonight, can I use my 2018 instead of 2019?
The answer to that question is, unfortunately, no. The FAFSA is tied, the FAFSA for 2021, 2022 is tied to the 2019 income. If for some reason 2019 is not a great indicator of what your family has, it would be really important to get in touch with the college financial aid offices as well as the Vermont State Grant Program to follow up and say, this is not a true indicator of what we have, and to maybe give more information about that. And then the colleges and VSAC can decide where to go from there.
Okay, I'm sorry, I said it would be the last question, but a couple more popped in that I think we should just answer. Do grandparents' 529 funds need to also be entered into this form?
Oh, okay, you're pausing for me. Sorry, I thought there was more coming. If a grandparent holds a 529 asset, it does not get reported on the FAFSA. It might get reported on the CSS profile, which is a specialized financial aid form that private colleges use. It does not get reported on the FAFSA. However, when the grandparent uses that 529 to pay the student's college bill, when they have to report that, they have to report it as income. So let's say the grandparent pays on the student's bill in the fall of 2021. That will show up on the student's 2023-2024 FAFSA application as non-taxable income. So the asset doesn't get reported, but when it gets used in that time frame, it will get reported as non-taxable income for the student.
One last question. Are student assets considered at 100%? You said parents were 5 to 7, but what about students?
Student assets are looked at a rate of 20%. So not the entire amount, but certainly a larger amount than the parents. And then the next year when the student applies for financial aid, it's 20% of what's left in there. These are all excellent questions.
Yeah, and there's more pouring in, but I would love you to go forward a little bit and I'll grab some more.
Okay, great. So we have actually finished the parent section, and I have to tell you, this is the home stretch, if you will. And so now we are in the student information. And so it asks for 2019, have you completed your IRS income tax return or another tax return? And we're going to say that Brian's not going to file 2019 taxes. And the reason why we see with a lot of high school students, and especially high school seniors, they haven't worked. 2019 would have been part of their sophomore and junior year of high school. And so some of them have not worked at that point. So for this student, he's not going to file. And we hit next to continue. They say you can't use IRS data retrieval because you didn't file taxes. This student had 0 earnings. But if a student had earnings that were reported on a W-2, they would put that in right here. And again, these questions come up, but for many students, it doesn't apply. So child support that the student paid because of divorce or separation. Earnings from work under a cooperative education program offered by a college. So for a high school senior, that's probably not something that's happening. Taxable earnings from need-based employment programs like federal work study and need-based employment portions of fellowships or assistantships. Probably not as a high school senior, but maybe when Brian's a college student, he might be reporting something here. And then it asks if Brian received child support. And even in the case of students getting child support, a lot of times child support is paid to the parent for the student's care. So it would be the parent reporting that income, not the student. Housing, food, and other allowances. Again, high school seniors probably not having this. Payments to a tax-deferred pension plan. Probably not. Veterans non-education benefits. Other untaxed income like workers' comp or disability. Probably not being reported here. And money received or paid on your behalf, not reported elsewhere on this form. When parents are paying bills for students, nothing's getting reported here. But as I mentioned, for those grandparents who have a 529, when they cash that, for instance, on Brian's 2023-2024 FAFSA, that might be showing up right here. And then as of today, what's the total current balance of cash, savings, and checking? Brian has a little bit of money saved. He has no investments. His beater car is not an investment. And as of today, the net worth of current business or investment farms, that's also going to be 0. And do you remember I said we were in the home stretch? This is almost done. Marilyn, do you want to pause for a couple more questions?
Sure, let's do a couple of them. So I'm going to answer one of them if you don't mind, Carrie. So the question is, if I stopped working at the end of 2019 and am not working now because of kids and COVID and our income is significantly reduced, there is nowhere to say that on the FAFSA. And that's right. You can't say that on the FAFSA. What you need to do, that is an appealable situation, and you need to write to your colleges, and you certainly need to write to VSAC. And a few months ago, VSAC did a session just like we're doing tonight, but it was VSAC shows you how to appeal your financial aid. And at the end of this evening, we're going to show you where you can find previously recorded VSAC shows you how events, and you can go right there to figure out how to do that. Let's see. Roth IRAs, where are those reported, Carrie?
So an IRA is a retirement vehicle, and so does not get reported on the FAFSA.
Perfect. My husband owns his own business with 2 to 3 employees. So we don't list the value of his business, just his salary. Is that right?
On the FAFSA, that's correct.
Okay. Oh, good Lord. Are capital gain costs considered with regards to the student's 20%? I have to say that one's over my head.
That one's over my head too. Capital gains often show up as income, I think. And so it would depend on whose tax return that's showing up.
Carrie, if the student indeed had filed a tax return, can you pull their information just like you did for the parent?
That's correct. You can pull that information from the IRS. And I'm going to make a plug here. This is just my personal bias. This is not VSAC talking. This is Carrie talking. I recommend that if students have earnings, they have a W-2, it probably makes sense to file a tax return, because if a student gets chosen for verification at their college, it's a process that 20% of all students who file the FAFSA will get chosen for. And so if a student gets chosen for verification, one of the things is if you brought in information from the IRS, you don't have to prove anything about your income because that came from the IRS. And so if a student has like $3,000 worth of earnings and they don't have to file, but they've got W-2s, I sometimes recommend that they file, a free tax return, a simple tax return, so that they can grab that information from the IRS when they file their FAFSA.
Okay, one last question and then we'll keep moving. How are joint savings accounts considered when a student has a joint savings account with a parent? Is that reported as a parent asset or a student asset?
So often those are reported as a student asset. Largely what happens is the parent is there as the over 18 person, especially when it's been a childhood, but it's the student savings account, so it gets reported as the student's asset.
Perfect. I'm going to let you go ahead and then we'll do a few more at the end if we have time.
Okay, great. So this is preparer information. We have now put in all of the financial information that we need for the FAFSA. And this asks, are you a preparer? A preparer is someone that you pay to fill out the form for you. So if you're a parent, or if you're getting help from someone from VSAC, but you are the one filling out the form, you're just getting help from us, and you don't pay us when we do one-on-one help at VSAC, this answer would be no. And so we hit next. And you can see all of the information. This is the summary. You can see all of the information for Brian here. And you can do one last check. Does everything look right? And you can see the dependency information. We've got the parent information from the tax forms. And remember, you will only see transferred from the IRS for everything that came through from the IRS data retrieval. And if everything looks right, you can choose to print this page. If you're someone who likes to have something printed, you can print this page, or you can just hit next when you're ready. And this is where students and parents sign and submit. This is another place where, and so we're going to provide the student signature. And we have to agree to the terms. And basically, we're agreeing that this is all true to the best of our knowledge, and that the student has not given out their FSA ID to anyone else. And that also, if additional information is needed, that the student agrees to submit that. That's that whole, if the student was chosen for verification, to verify that information. So we'll say next. And I just remembered we did change that. So let me double check here. And we'll hit sign. Okay. And so this is not working. That's okay. We're going to keep going. Hit next. And you'll notice it says student signature unsigned. There's probably a problem there that I'm going to need to go back and troubleshoot. But this is also which parent. And this is, remember I said you got to keep track of which parent you put as parent 1, parent 2. And so the person that we had as parent 2, the parent we had as parent 1 was the parent with the FSA ID. We agree to the same terms. And we will sign. And that one worked. So this is how it should look for both of them, that they signed electronically. You could move forward and you could hit submit without the student signature, but we may not want to do that. So this might be a situation where we saved. If you were having trouble with the student signature not working, you could troubleshoot it a little bit, but at the same time, you might be able to submit without signatures and go in and log in later to submit that with a signature once you've done the troubleshooting and figured that out. Once you hit submit, Sabina, could I have you share that slide? Oh, the previous slide to that, sorry. There we go. This is what the confirmation page looks like after you hit submit. And so I love how it says, congratulations, student name, even when parents have been filling out the form and doing it. But it says, congratulations, student name, your FAFSA was successfully submitted. And then what I wanted to show you is down here, this blue box says you can start your state application to apply for Vermont state-based financial aid here. And you can click there, and that would lead you to My VSAC and applying for your Vermont grant. There's other information on your confirmation page. If you scroll down, there's information about your EFC, your expected family contribution, and there's also information about the colleges that you listed on the FAFSA. Go ahead and do the next slide, please. I want to talk about the places where you can also get financial aid forms help. By phone, you can call Federal Student Aid at 800-4FED-AID. They're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 11, and Saturday and Sunday, 11 to 5. If you want to, you can also call VSAC for help with your FAFSA, as well as for help with your Vermont grant application. That number's on the screen, and we're open from 8 to 4:30 on weekdays. Online, while you're filling out the FAFSA, there is a FAFSA chat option. And so while you're filling out the FAFSA, you can get some help in the moment while you're filling it out. And at VSAC, we're also offering financial aid help. You can go to vsac.org/FAFSA, and you can schedule a 1 hour, actually it's more like 55 minutes, one-on-one appointment to get help with VSAC staff. And we're meeting via Zoom since we're not able to be in a lot of schools right now. We have daytime appointments, we have some evening appointments, and we also have one Saturday a month available for appointments. And go ahead next.
So Carrie, just a couple of really fast questions because I know we're over time and I know people's time is very precious. There's a number of questions asking, when is the best time to file your FAFSA?
Oh gosh, when is the best time? So I'll tell you, October's really busy. I know everybody loves to file their FAFSA in October. October can be pretty busy. There's a lot of internet traffic. You want to make sure to meet your college's deadlines. So if you have a deadline of November 1st, you might have to file your FAFSA in October. Students who are doing early decision programs might be in that situation where they have to apply early. So really it depends on the college and what the deadline is. But in addition to that, some colleges have an earlier deadline for their own financial aid and for their institutional money. So earlier is better.
Perfect. So I'm going to wrap us up. I just want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. So a number of questions we got said, is this being recorded and how can I get to it? All of our VSAC Shows You How presentations are recorded. They are available on Facebook about an hour from now, but they're also available on the YouTube channel, My VSAC Story channel. And you can go there and see, we have one out there right now on how to choose an education loan, how to appeal your financial aid, this one on filing a FAFSA. So certainly by all means, go and look at those. On November 18th, we will be doing our next VSAC Shows You How, and we invite you to join us to learn how to file your application for your Vermont State Grant and also how to apply for over 130 VSAC administered scholarships, which are for Vermont residents. So certainly we would welcome your attendance at that event on November 18th at 6 p.m. And again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. This has been great. We have one last poll question for you, just so we can tell whether you found this particular event tonight to be helpful. So do you feel ready to fill out your FAFSA? So thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to talking to you again in November.